I ask you to talk a little bit about your sense that when you make a painting of this kind, it's not abstract, but it's a thing in itself. So what would be the difference between this and an Abex painting, or these paintings and an Abex painting?
I don't think there's a difference.
Okay.
What I would say is they're doing the same thing, and yet they would call, they had a hard time coming up with a name of what they were doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't always abstract expressionism. One name they were circulating was concrete painting. Mm-hmm. Never caught on, but it was, and I understand that name. Yeah. Action painting, of course, also caught on. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interchangeable with abstract expressionism. But I think it's very much the experience of any artist writing music or painting a portrait or making an abstract painting is ultimately the point where the object arrives. And that's not abstract.
Sure. Yeah. I agree with you entirely. Yeah. And then you used the word magic a little while back, talking about making those drawings when you were a kid and how that space opened up another world that was somehow or other created beyond your own intention, shall we say. But it seems to me that when I see a work of art that I know is a real work of art, I intuitively know that there's something magical about that there's something beyond my cognitive ability to explain how it got into the world. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by artists, is because they are, in a way, for me, magicians in the classical sense. They make things that no other human being can make. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where does that come from? I'm going to circle back around to that word inspiration, so get ready.
Okay, all right, I'll get prepared. I think I use the word magic as a way of referring to forces. Mm-hmm. And the forces, of course, I'm experiencing, you could explain as my projections. But when I'm in the painting, I'm doing the work in the painting, there's no question that I'm orchestrating forces. I think those forces, to me, are magical. Because at a certain point, you realize there are relationships that are beginning to occur that are outside of my control. Mm-hmm. And I either want to reveal them or suppress them, but they are there. Sure. And to me, if that doesn't start happening, I don't know where I am. And at a certain point, the painting tunes itself, or I'm tuning it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that sound of a bell, and then I've worked my way out.
Sure. And what have you worked your way out of?
Sadly, the painting doesn't need me anymore. Yeah. It's done.
Yeah. I love the way.
Or I think it's done. I may get back into it, but there's a moment like that painting when I'm looking at it with a kind of space in which I feel like I'm looking down and into a labyrinth where doors show up magically. Yeah. And there's a point where it is just settled into what it is. And those relationships are right. And it's not checking off some rules somewhere. It's not, it's felt, it's here. Yeah. And so it's in a body, my body knows, it's like the form speaks, and my body knows, and my brain agrees.
I love the way you put that. And I don't know about others, but what I know is that I myself or people walking down the sidewalk don't have that kind of life experience. It really is extraordinary that you can do that an artist can do that. But the other thing I'm thinking about too is that here we are all in this space, this amazing space. Isn't it just incredible that people in this community came together with people like Power and made this collection of paintings possible in this space with these people in this room, which is not about this room alone, but it's about this town, it's about this city, it's about the future of the people in this community. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that part of your life as an artist, how it's not just about you and not just about the painting, but really about relationships among people that are of the kind that you describe in magical terms.
That's a really great question, because I lived for 30 years in New York City. Tom Zetterstrom here was a old friend from college, and we actually roomed on 18th. We were in the same, we were roommates in an apartment on 18th Street. But when I settled into New York in Soho, there was a community I was part of, a very rich community, a community of restaurants and banks and places where you bought fruit, and then other artists and artists in other fields, music, dance, theater. It was such a rich community. And I thought, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in New York. Having moved here to this area, I realized it's up to me to create that community or to engage that community. And fortunately, there is one right here with Judy at the center of it. I would not be here if it weren't for Judy and the way this town, the timing was perfect. I was available for more time to work with a project here that was local, and it's very exciting to have this conversation that's just with where you live. It's part of where you live. I don't miss New York. I had a great time there, and I'm having as rich experience here.
Yeah, I would add that for me, what you just said and these paintings in this space make me think of all of the debate that we're having nowadays about the globalization of art and the monetization of art and how art has become sort of co-opted by the market, and that artists are now making art toward the market, so therefore the market is determining what an artwork looks like rather than that magical experience that you point out for yourself. And I'm feeling very grateful that there are still people such as yourself that can make art that is not dominated and controlled by a global, worldwide, fiscal construct. And I'm beginning to think that maybe where we want to look for art is not in Chelsea, or not in Paris or Berlin or whatever the case may be, but in places like this, where it really is going on. And I'm reminded of this work, what art can be, not just for you as the artist, for the work itself, but also for the people that are present for that art and are in fact, at least in my case, inspired by that art.
A great inspiration for me is Piero del Francesco.
Yeah.
As you all know,
Sure.
He never worked in the big towns.
Yeah.
He lived in San Sepolcro. He was on the city council. So the early Renaissance painter. He always stayed in the town. He grew up in San Sepolcro. He worked for Sassetta, who was the most famous artist, older artist who came through, and became his assistant and trained with him, but he always made work in small towns. He never did a piece in even Florence. He did a piece in Rome, never. So, and then he stayed loyal to that town. I like the fact that he sat on the city council and he painted the Resurrection, 1459, on the back of that city council. And people go and make that pilgrimage to see his work, sure, because he is, true to his place and didn't aspire, I think, to do anything more. It's interesting.
And then I guess the only other question I would have, I think it would be wonderful if we could open it up to other people asking questions. I'm sure there'll be better ones from the audience. But the only other question I would ask is, where are you in your career? You're obviously an advanced practitioner, shall we say. You've been around for a while. What moment does this collection mark for you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you know, being in New York, I wanted to do everything I could do. And I made films and I did set design for theater and had somewhat of a career in dance, doing work for avant-garde choreographers. I really enjoyed the collaborative aspect of theater. And then I got involved with more and more involved with teaching and ended up being the dean of the Hartford Art School, which was a great opportunity to work with a whole group of people who cared about building and improving that school. In a way, I like doing projects. So now I am no longer a dean, I'm no longer an administrator, so I'm back in the classroom, which I really love. I keep reinventing that classroom. I want to be the best possible teacher. I'm really focused on artists, young artists, being artists. I don't care about all the other stuff. That's the issue. And whatever I can do to support what it is they need to do. And I get a lot of energy from it. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm not one of those artists who complains that they teach. I love teaching. Yeah. And then, last summer, this work showed up. And I hadn't been able to work on this scale with that kind of time and energy for many years. So in a sense, I'm returning to where I used to be. I used to be painting shows, at least 15 paintings a year of this scale, and showing at least every other year in New York City. And I haven't been on that. And in a way, what's nice about this show and the way I'm working now is I'm not worried about what the show's going to look like. That painting looks different from that painting, and I do what I want to do. I'm not trying to make it be. I just want to make the work I need to make. And I'm hungry to get it going. I mean, I can't wait to get back in the studio. So.
You pressed me to ask another question, and then I do want to open it up. But it seems to me that you have a style that has developed over the past several decades. You're always recognizable, even when they're not gridded. And to me, if I were going to try to characterize or encapsulate or capture that style, it would come back to that notion of the dialogue that you have with the work when you're making it, that it's not a one-way discussion. It is, in fact, a conversation or a dialogue where you're not dominating the canvas, but you're asking, where shall I go next? And out of that comes for me sort of an inward generosity or willingness to look for the gift as opposed to a drive to steal the prize.
That sounds great.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no. And so there was a period when I used to play a lot of chess, but I was really lousy at it because I didn't necessarily care about winning. I think you're supposed to want to win, right? What I loved was that middle game when everything was in play. I didn't want to touch the board. I thought, isn't that great? Every piece is in play. And the winning part, when you kind of whittle down to the last pieces, I always messed up. So in a way, I realized my strength is the middle game. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's part of why I titled the show Borderline. I feel the middle is where the borders meet. Mm-hmm. You know, one border that I'm interested in is me and the thing, me and this canvas. It's different to me, and yet we're in a conversation. We're really in an intense conversation with each other. And that exchange is really interesting to me. And I think it's why we make art. I think it's that handmade quality that It isn't. So it isn't about the image, you know, and it's not entirely about the process. Something has to show up in between there that actually then matters.
Yeah. Nicely said. That
You know,
would be the
things
border.
matter,
Yeah.
and this matters. This work matters. And if I can't find, and so when I start a painting, I want something to happen. As Richard Foreman once said in a play, you go on vacation because you want to have an adventure, but the adventure doesn't begin till your suitcase is stolen. The thing you didn't want happens. And now you're on an adventure. You got to deal with the police and this and that. And you come back home. Yeah, we went to Rome, but the suitcase was stolen. We had to buy clothes locally. We had to do, I mean, that's where the adventure is. And in a funny way, you can't fake it. So when I start the painting, I'm wanting something to happen. That blue painting with those lines goes back to something older. All of the other paintings in this room I think of as frontal. And because of the way that those lines are, it's also it's seeing the world from the side. And it's frontal. That's unique in that painting. Each one has a unique adventure it took me on, which I wasn't sure I could handle. I wasn't sure I could manage the suitcase being stolen with that painting. I know I showed it to Ed without those dark lines, and it still wasn't right. You know, it was just, and those showed up, and I thought, okay, I managed to handle the suitcase being stolen.
Yeah, that just leads me to say one more thing, and that is that for me, what's so great about your work is the humility in the work that comes from that willingness to be taken on an adventure rather than insisting on causing an event, this willingness to listen.
I think it's the openness to the discovery.
Yeah.
Knowing something, it's not going to get interesting until something happens. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but when it does, I'm all in, you know. Yes, but. The paintings where it's interesting how I think of the painting. First, I've got to figure out what it is, and then when it's done, and I decide not to destroy it, because I might destroy it. Even though I know it's done, it's not really as interesting as I thought it was. I destroy a lot of work. And so when it's done, what I love is it getting out in the world. And I never provide an artist statement because I don't know how to write one. I frankly find another word strange, and that is meaning. I don't know what it means. Isadora Duncan, quoted by Bateson, said, if I knew what the dance meant, I wouldn't have to dance it. And I think even when you dance it, you don't know what it means. Which doesn't mean it's meaningless. I think it's actually meaningful. However, that fullness is in a real gut response. It's a felt coherence, not a verbal one. And so when somebody's going to see it outside of me, and this is such a great opportunity, I'm really interested in your response. I want you to use the painting to think with and through and feel or not. And I'm not interested in a message. Absolutely, and yet I still want it to be meaningful. But if you ask me, what's it mean? I don't have an answer. Yeah. It's like, well, I would say if you saw a tree that you loved, you wouldn't ask, what's it mean? Yeah, you know, they were done back and forth. I mean, they were done around the same time last summer. All this work was done last summer and into the fall. And this painting, I think, is still wet, because I got back into it the day before I loaded in here, which is why there's a little bit of red paint on the edge of the frame, which isn't really a frame, it's just a protecting piece of wood. So those two paintings were coming along and went very different directions, I felt, and yet they were pals. Yeah, they were actually being made around the same time. And when I couldn't figure out what to do with one of them, I put it away and pull out the other one and work on that one. Parts of both those paintings are done very quickly, and then other parts of those paintings are done very slowly. So in the beginning, I set up almost a set of tasks I'm going to do, things I'm going to do that surface. And then as that surface starts to become something I can work with, then so I work flat quite a bit in the beginning, and then it goes up on the wall, and then it starts to find its way to what it wants to become. It's a very odd thing. Once a painting is taking me somewhere, I almost treat it like a human being. It's going to take me somewhere. It's a conversation I'm not fully directing. I've got to keep up with it. Verbal rules? Yeah, no, I don't too much. But I do lay out a grid, and that grid might just be a 6-foot ruler I put on, and I just put dots at every 3 inches. And I don't measure much more than that. I don't overly stress on the measurements, but I do lay it out. I keep thinking I want to do it as well as I can if I just do it in a certain relaxed way. And then from then on, I'm on my own. I don't really ever go back and measure where I am. You know, de Kooning had a great answer, which was he never finished a painting, he just abandoned the painting. Which I used to use as my answer, but the fact is, usually I know I can't do another thing. It's done. If I do something, I'm going to start changing the painting, and now I'm going to have to repaint the whole thing. So there's a point where I paint myself out of the painting, and it's done. It is what it is. I'm not sure it's any good at that point. I sometimes have to get Lynn, my wife, to come in and say, is this interesting? And then she'll say, or, yeah, this is good. So now I know it's okay. I really am working to a large extent outside of good and bad, because it doesn't help me. The good and bad kinds of decisions tend to be very conservative. You know, I don't want to be encumbered by whether or not it's good or not, if it needs to go where it needs to go. Like, I was really concerned. I started making those things that look like doors, and I thought, well, that's kind of corny. And then I said, no, they're not corny. I like this. This is curious. It's not at all like this painting. I was expecting it to be more like this. So, and then I thought, well, yeah, this is where it has to go. But is it interesting? And I realized it was. So that's how I finish a painting. I just try to go where it needs to go and then stop. So making a painting for me is to be thinking with it. And the marks I want to make really clear and clean. I have certain rules where I want to absolutely avoid faces because they can show up. 2 dots in a line and you got a face. They're tricky. I don't want that. I don't want that. That's why I wasn't so sure about the doors. So the fact is, you know, I'll find actually this is a good one, that there's a rule there that I didn't know was there because I'm starting to do it, and avoid something. So the idea is it's this distribution of thinking. It's a distribution of marks that's still interesting. They're playing off each other. And somebody asked me, well, why don't you just put a nice red mark in the middle of this? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, then you'd have a red mark and a background. I want everything to be in play. That would just completely change the painting. Just as I don't think the world we live in is a background. This is your Heidegger, you know, we don't occupy it, we inhabit it. It's a living world we're in. And so, to me, that's what the painting's about. It's everything is alive, everything's in play. And the balance is just, but interesting stuff gets to happen. You know? So, can you come with me into this work? I don't, you know, maybe not. It's an invitation, that's all. And where you want to go with it, I can't predict. I hope it's interesting. I love Mondrian, and I've read everything Mondrian has written. And I wrote a piece about Mondrian because, for me, he's involved in an odd series of contradictions. One of them is that he was very much a Platonic philosopher. He loved, all of his allusions were with Plato, and Plato, of course, puts reality behind the surface. And I think, you know, but that's not how Mondrian works. That's not how they work for me. The other thing that I think is really interesting, if you think of Mondrian's paintings, they're never symmetrical. Never. Because he talks about dynamic balance. And he uses lots of different ways to refer to it, but dynamic balance means it's always inside, piece to piece, it's out of balance, but the whole comes back into balance. And then there's this notion that, you know, Mondrian's a kind of essentialist, you know, red, yellow, blue, black, and white. He hated green. So he not only hated green, he found it utterly distressing to see green. He'd shut the window in the summer because he didn't want to see the green. And I actually think the reason he didn't like green is not that it's a secondary color and it's not a primary. I think the green is too lush. He wanted to get to the bones of the painting, and all that green leafy stuff is just overwhelming. It's all getting in the way of the structure. And I think he just found it hard. And yet, you think about Mondrian, when he came to New York in 1941, he spent his time dancing. He went to the club. Yeah. He loved jazz. And then he'd go back to his little studio. And he would just spend a lot of time, and he'd just move that line, which was a taped line, just a fraction of an inch. What is he measuring that against? Here. Here is where it's happening. You know, so he's doing it here. You know, there's no other rule. And then he'd go over and paint the flowers that he could sell. And they were sold at a different gallery on Madison Avenue. The chrysanthemums, beautiful paintings. And those sold, that's how he paid his rent. His passion was, and you know, when you see the last painting, Victory Boogie Woogie, with all the tapes still on there, it's just amazing because you're seeing the kind of process he would go through. See, Mondrian's really important for me because I think the more I understood him, he was a very visceral, physical painter, even though they, you know, have this. You know, and I think trying to be original is a mistake, actually. How about that? I actually just think you want. Yeah, well, it's a language thing, because you probably would agree. It seems original, but in fact, you just want to make the work that you need to make. And if it's original or not, it's not an issue. If it's good or bad, it's not an issue. I mean, you really have to work outside of those constraints. constraints. If you're trying to chase a market, you're always behind. You just have to do your work, and either the market's going to find you or not. I don't think Van Gogh was ever painting for the market. I think he understood this was his obsession, this is what he did. He was fortunately supported by a brother, Theo, who then understood that this was important for Theo to support Van Gogh. And Van Gogh was painting, imagine how bad his paintings were, given the given the conventions of his time. These are terrible paintings. He and Gauguin used to carouse around town getting drunk, those two drunks. And then there's Van Gogh going back to his room, out in the woods, out in the fields, painting and painting. And he was just a crazy person. Cézanne wasn't treated much differently. His friends, he got real grumpy at the end of his life. He'd walk down the street and see a friend, he'd cross the street. He didn't want to talk to him because nobody thought he was very interesting. And yet, both Cézanne and Van Gogh become the center of the 20th century art world. Picasso understood when Cézanne dies in 1906, I think it's really, the painting Damsels d'Avignon was painted in 1906. I really think he was bringing Cézanne's bathers into that. And it was Picasso who really opened up people's eyes to Cézanne. So what is your role in all of this? The market, to a large extent, is not playing that big of a role. It's the people pursuing what they need to do. And that's it. And you can look back and say, well, the market was unfair to them or fair to them or not. And I don't think it's the issue once you see the work. You know what? I think we all have a sense of timing in ourselves, and mine, I think, is my sense of walking. And then I had a bad car accident. I had a lot of issues with my knees and legs, and I think my walking, I used to run. I was a captain of the cross-country team in high school, and but could no longer really do anything I really can't do that anymore. I have new legs, new knees, replaced. But the joy I would take in being able to walk, I had such appreciation for it. Walking in New York, and I realized there's a gait, there's a kind of way that it gets in my work. It's not listening to music. It's actually what seems right in terms of the pace and the scale and the rhythms and the relationships. I think it's about walking. Some people, I think, breathing is important. So I have an answer to that question, but I can't explain it much more than that because it's internal. Oh, when I saw Agnes Martin, it just knocked me out, and I thought, how can she get away with that? It's so thin. It really told me, it's not about how much. It's so quiet. I remember the first show I saw of her drawings. It was the Elgin Gallery up on Madison Avenue, and it was 1968, and I walked in, and I almost feel like I can still see that group, and they were $800 a piece, and it was so much money, and I wished I thought, God, if I just worked out a deal, maybe I'd get $50 a month. I wish I had done it but in any way you don't have to. It's still just stay with me. So Agnes Martin is certainly an inspiration in that regard, and I think it's her life too. Talk about choices, At a certain point, she goes off to New Mexico, gets a bulldozer, builds a house, and commits to her work in that environment. Why not? Perfect. But I'll also say a big influence to me, and I think about him all the time, and this would probably surprise you, is Rembrandt. Mm-hmm. And the reason is Rembrandt's portraits, self-portraits, I keep thinking about how it's so meaningless to say self-portraits. It doesn't explain anything. How those paintings show up, how he as an individual, as a painter, as somebody honestly painting himself as he grows older. And in that last paint, one of those last paintings, I don't know if it's the last one, but he's sitting on a throne almost, it's like his sword is next to him, but it's actually the stick he uses to steady his hand to do the painting. There's such humor in that, and then you look at how it's painted. You look at his eyes. You look at it still just knocks me out. Yeah, no, I'm not quite sure where to go with it, except to say that I feel very fortunate that I have something like this that I do that is a mystery to me and keeps being, and otherwise I wouldn't do it. I think that when Isadora Duncan says, if I knew what it meant, I wouldn't have to dance it, is an answer to your, it's that mystery at the center of it is, I think about it, how do we exist? One of the scariest things is to make a line on a painting. Like, make the choice to take this out or put it in. And those moments by yourself and you're working this thing out, how this little area pinches in here, or, they're just things that I'm working on. I don't know that anybody else would ever care about, but I feel like I'm at a place where I actually am feeling what it means to bring something into existence. And it's a mystery that anything exists at all, right? But here we are. Amazing. Wow. And there's something sacred about that.
Maybe those words are a good place to end on. I think they're absolutely beautiful. Thank you ever so much, Power. Nicely done.
Thanks, George.